Chapter 005. Start over. Zorian's eyes abruptly shot open as sharp pain erupted from his stomach. His whole body convulsed, buckling against the object that fell on him, and suddenly he was wide awake, not a trace of drowsiness in his mind. "Good morning, brother," an annoyingly cheerful voice sounded right on top of him. "Morning, morning, morning." Zorian stared at Kiriel in shock, trying to understand what happened. The last thing he remembered was the lich casting that spell at him and Zack, and then blackness. His eyes darted left and right, taking in his surroundings and confirming his suspicions. He was in his room, back in Siren. That didn't make any sense, though. He was pleased that he survived the whole experience, but at the very least he expected to wake up in the hospital or something. And Kiriel shouldn't be this casual with him after he went through so harrowing an experience. Not even she was this inconsiderate. Besides, this entire scene was eerily familiar. "Kiri?" Yes? What day is it?" Zorian asked, already dreading the answer. "Thursday." He scowled. "I meant date, Kiri. 1st of Chariot. You're going to the academy today." "Don't tell me you forgot," Kiriel prodded. Literally, she accompanied her words with a well-placed jab at his flank, sticking her bony little index finger in between his ribs. Zorian slapped her hand away, hissing in pain. "I did not forget." Zorian snapped. He stopped there. What was he supposed to tell her? Frankly, he had no idea what was going on himself. "You know what?" he said after a moment of silence. "Never mind that, I think it's high time you got off of me." Before Kiriel could answer, Zorian unceremoniously flipped her over the edge of the bed before jumping up himself. He snatched his glasses from the set of drawers next to his bed and his eyes swept through his room with more attention to detail this time, seeking anything out of place, anything that might unmask this as a giant, if rather tasteless, prank. While his memory wasn't flawless, he had a habit of arranging his belongings in very specific ways to detect nosy family members rummaging through his belongings. He found nothing massively out of place, so unless his mysterious reenactor knew his system inside and out, unlikely, or Kiri finally decided she'd respect the sanctity of his room while he was away, hell would sooner freeze over. This really was his room like he left it when he went to Cyoria. Was it all a dream, then? It seemed altogether too real for a dream. His dreams had always been vague, nonsensical, and prone to evaporate out of his memory soon after he woke up. These felt exactly like his normal memories: no talking birds, floating pyramids, three-eyed wolves and other surreal scenes his dreams usually contained. And there was so much of it, too. Surely a whole month worth of experiences is too much for a mere dream? "Mom wants to talk to you," Kiriel told him from the floor, apparently not in any great hurry to get up. "But hey, can you show me some magic before you get down? Please? Pretty please?" Zorian frowned. "Magic, huh?" Come to think of it, he learned quite a bit of magic. Surely if this was all a particularly elaborate dream, all the magic he learned there would be completely bogus, right? He made a couple of sweeping gestures and words before cupping his hands in front of him. A floating orb of light promptly materialized above his palms. Huh. Not just an elaborate dream, then. "That's amazing!" Kiriel gushed, poking the orb with her finger only to have it pass straight through it. Not surprising, really, since it was just light. She withdrew her finger and curiously stared at it, as if expecting to find it changed somehow. Zorian mentally directed the orb to fly around the room and circle Kiriel a few times. Yep, he definitely knew the spell. He retained not just the memory of the casting procedure, but also the fine control he developed with repeated practice with it. You don't get things like that from a mere vision, even a prophetic one. More, demanded Kiriel. Oh come on, Kiri, sighed Zorian. He really wasn't in the mood for her antics at the moment. I indulged you, didn't I? Go find something else to amuse yourself now. She pouted at him, but he was thoroughly immune to such things by now. Then she frowned for a moment and suddenly straightened as if remembering something. Wait. No. Zorian shouted, but he was already too late. Kiri already ran into the bathroom and slammed the door behind her. Damn it, Kiri, why now? Why not before I woke up? Sucks to be you, she answered. Zorian leaned forward until his forehead collided with the door. I had forewarning and I still fell for it. He frowned. Forewarning, indeed. Whatever his future memories were, they seemed to be fairly reliable. Was Saoria really going to get invaded during the summer festival, then? What should he do about that? What could he do about that? He shook his head and marched back to his room. He would not even contemplate that sort of question until he found out more about what had happened to him. He locked the door so he would have some privacy and sat on his bed. He needed to think. Okay. So he lived through a whole month of school before something happened, and then he woke up in his room back in Siren, as if the entire month never happened. Even with magic factored in, that was preposterous. Time travel was impossible. He didn't have any books in his room that discussed the topic at any appreciable length, but all of the passages that dealt with time travel agreed that it couldn't be done. Even dimensional magic could only warp time, speeding it up or slowing it. It was one of the few things mages agreed was beyond the ability of magic to accomplish. So how, then, was he living through it? He was just in the process of consulting the books in his room for any type of magic that could fake time travel in some way when a knock on his door interrupted his thoughts, and he suddenly realized he was still in his pajamas and that Mother wanted to talk to him quite a while ago. He quickly changed and opened the door, only to find himself under the scrutiny of two women, only one of which was his mother. He almost greeted Ilsa by name, but he caught himself in time. A teacher from the academy has come to talk to you, his mother said, her disapproving stare telling him she was going to give him an earful once Ilsa left. Greetings, Ilsa said. I am Ilsa Zalady, from Saoria's Royal Academy of Magical Arts. I was hoping to speak to you about some matters before you leave. It won't take long. Of course, said Zorian. Where do you? Your room shall suffice, Ilsa said. I'll bring you something to drink, his mother said, excusing herself. Zorian watched Ilsa as she unpacked various papers and placed them on his desk. What was she doing with those, anyway, trying to decide how to proceed with this? If his future memories were valid, she should be handing him the scroll right about.
Yeah.
There it is. Knowing what's going to happen in advance is weird. For the sake of appearances, Zorian gave the scroll a cursory examination before channeling mana into it. It was exactly how he remembered it, the calligraphy, the flowery official-sounding phrases, the elaborate crest at the bottom of the document, and Zorian felt a wave of dread wash over him. What the hell had he gotten himself involved in? He had no idea what was happening to him, but it was big. Very big. He had the urge to tell Ilsa about his predicament and seek her advice, but he restrained himself. It sounded like the most sensible thing to do. Surely a fully trained mage like her was far more qualified for tackling this than he was, but what could he possibly tell her? That he was remembering things that hadn't happened yet?
Yeah.
That would go over well. Besides, considering the nature of his future memories, he could easily see himself arrested if a conspiracy to invade Saoria was really discovered thanks to his warnings. After all, it's far more likely his shocking knowledge comes from being a defector of the conspiracy than him being some kind of weird time traveler. An image of a couple of government agents torturing him for information briefly flittered through his mind and he shuddered. No, best to keep all this to himself for now. So for the next 10 minutes, Zorian basically reenacted his memories of his initial interaction with Ilsa, not seeing the point in choosing differently this time. All of his choices were made for reasons that were currently every bit as valid as they were in his future memories. He didn't argue with Ilsa about Sven this time around, though, since he already knew arguing over that topic was pointless, and he didn't request a bathroom break, since he already knew what electives he wished to take. Ilsa seemed completely indifferent to his strange decisiveness, apparently just as eager as he was to get this whole thing out of the way. Then again, why would she be surprised at his decisiveness? She had no future memories to compare this entire encounter to, unlike him. Hell, she didn't even know him up until now. Zorian sighed and shook his head. They really did feel just like normal memories, and it was hard to ignore them. This is going to be one long month. Are you all right, Mr. Kaczynski? Zorian glanced at Ilsa curiously, trying to divine why she asked him that. She glanced towards his hands, only for a moment, but Zorian caught it. His hands were shaking. He balled them into fists and took a deep breath. "I'm fine," he said. A second or so of uncomfortable silence ensued, Ilsa apparently unwilling to continue with her closing speech while she continued to study him. "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course," Ilsa said. "That's why I'm here. What do you think about time travel?" She was clearly taken aback by the question. It was probably the last thing she expected him to ask, or at least close to the bottom of the list. She composed herself very quickly though. "Time travel is impossible," Ilsa said firmly. "Time can only be dilated or compressed. Never skipped or reversed." "Why?" asked Zorian, honestly curious. He had never actually seen an explanation for the impossibility of time travel, though that might be because he wasn't terribly interested in the topic up until now. Ilsa sighed. "I admit I'm not particularly knowledgeable about the details, but our best theories indicate that going against temporal currents is utterly impossible. As in, draw a square circle, impossible, not leap over the ocean, impossible. The river of time flows only in one direction. Beyond that, innumerable attempts have been made in recorded past, all ending in failure." She gave him a sharp look. "I sincerely hope you won't waste your talents on such a fool's quest." "I was just curious," Zorian said defensively. "I was just reading a chapter discussing limitations of magic and wondered why the author was so certain time travel is impossible." "Well, now you know," Ilsa said, getting up. "Now if that's all, I really should be going. I'll be happy to answer any further questions on Monday after class. Have a nice day." Zorian watched her leave and shut the door behind her before collapsing back on his bed. Definitely a long month. Break. For once the train ride didn't put Zorian to sleep. He had subtly prodded Mother with some sensitive topics when she tried to scold him, and he was pretty sure this wasn't some kind of elaborate illusion, unless the illusionist was aware of some very closely kept family secrets. And he seemed far too lucid for this to be some kind of induced hallucination. As far as he could tell at the moment, he really did travel back in time. He had spent most of the train ride writing down everything of importance he could think of in one of his notebooks. He didn't really think the memories were going to fade any time soon, but it helped him organize his thoughts and notice details he might have otherwise missed. He noted that he forgot to retrieve his books from under Kiri's bed in all the confusion, but decided it didn't matter. If the classes were anything like they were the last time around, he wouldn't need them for the duration of the first month. It was that last spell the Lich performed on him and Zack, Zorian was sure of it. The trouble was, Zorian had no idea what the spell was. Even the words were unfamiliar. Standard incantations used Icosian words as their base, and Zorian knew enough of Icosian to get a general feel of a spell just by listening to what the caster's chanting, but the Lich used a different language for his incantation. Fortunately, Zorian had a really good memory and remembered most of the chant, so he wrote it down in his trusty notebook in phonetic form. He was pretty sure he wouldn't find the spell itself anywhere within his clearance level, as the spell was probably highly restricted and kept out of reach of first circle mages like him, but he would see about identifying the language and finding a proper dictionary in the academy library. The other clue to this whole thing was Zack himself. The boy was capable of fighting a lich, a freaking lich, for several minutes before succumbing to it. Even though the lich had been toying with him, it was still pretty impressive. Zorian would put Zack on par with a third circle mage, and probably more. What the hell was that guy doing with academy students then? Something was definitely strange about Zack, though Zorian had no intention of confronting the guy directly until he found out more about what's going on. For all he knew, it could be one of those "you know about us, so now we have to kill you" sort of things. He would have to tread carefully around the Novita air. Zorian slammed the notebook shut and ran his hand through his hair. No matter how he looked at it, this whole situation seemed utterly crazy. Did he really have memories from the future, or was he simply going insane? Both possibilities were terrifying. He was in no way qualified to tackle something like this on his own, but he didn't know how to get other people to help him without being carted off either to a madhouse or an interrogation chamber. He resolved to think about it later. As in, tomorrow later. This whole thing was simply too weird, and he needed to sleep on it before he decides anything. "Excuse me, is this seat free?" Zorian glanced at the speaker, recognizing her after a second of recollection. The nameless green turtleneck girl that joined him in his compartment when they took a stop at Corsa. Of course, the last time she didn't bother to ask for permission before taking a seat. What changed? It didn't matter. What did matter is that last time she was soon followed by 4 other girls. Very loud, very obnoxious girls. No way he'd be spending the rest of the train ride listening to their banter, again.
Yeah.
He nodded. In fact, I was just leaving. We're stopping at Corsa, right? Good day, miss. And then he quickly grabbed his luggage and went to search for another compartment, abandoning the girl to her fate. Maybe these future memories are good for something, after all. Break. Bam. Roach. Bam. 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 Roach, open the thrice-damned door. I know you're in here. Zorian rolled over in his bed and groaned. What the hell was Taven doing here this early? No, wait. He snatched the clock from his dresser and brought it in front of his face. She wasn't early, he just slept past noon. Huh. He distinctly remembered going straight to the academy from the train station and falling asleep minutes after reaching his room, yet he still overslept like this. Apparently dying and then awakening in the past is tiresome business. Bam. 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 I'm coming, shouted Zorian. Stop banging on my door, already. Naturally, she just kept banging on it with more enthusiasm. Zorian rushed to make himself presentable and stomped towards the door. Wrenching the door open, he gave Taven a withering look, which she promptly ignored. Finally, she said. What the hell took you so long? I was sleeping, Zorian ground out. Really? Yes, ground out. But dash. I was tired, Zorian snapped. Very tired. And what the hell are you waiting for? Get inside. She rushed inside and Zorian took a moment to collect himself before he confronted her. In his future memories, she never visited him once after he refused to go along with her mission to the sewers, which spoke volumes about her true feelings about this friendship of theirs. Then again, he hardly even thought about her himself until now, so he probably shouldn't judge. In any case, he was even less inclined to join her on this mission now than he was in his future memories. He actually had more pressing matters to attend to this time, in addition to general apprehensiveness that was still as valid now as it was then. Accordingly, he felt a lot less reluctance in simply blowing her off, and it only took him an hour to convince her to leave him alone. That done, he immediately set out for the library, making a short detour to a nearby bakery for a quick bite to tide him over. Once in the library, he started searching for books on the topic of time travel and trying to identify the language the Lich used in his spell. To call it disappointing would be calling it mildly. For one thing, there were no books on time travel. The topic was not considered a serious field of study, what with it being impossible and all. What little was written about it was scattered across innumerable volumes, hidden in unmarked sections and paragraphs of otherwise unrelated books. Piecing together these scattered mentions was an absolute chore, and not all that rewarding either. None of it was useful in solving the mystery of his future memories. Finding the language the Lich used in his spell was even more frustrating, since he failed to even identify the language, much less translate the chant. He spent the entire weekend fruitlessly sifting through library texts, finally abandoning that avenue of research when it became obvious it wasn't producing any results. Plus the library workers were starting to give him weird looks at his choice of literature, and he didn't want to create any unfortunate rumors. Hopefully he would be able to trick Zack into revealing what the hell was going on when school started. Break. You're late. Zorian stared at Akocha's stern face in quiet contemplation. He was glad he wouldn't have to deal with any drama because of his disastrous evening with her, almost as glad as he was about the fact that he wasn't dead, but he couldn't help but wonder what her outburst had been about. She didn't really look like she had a crush on him, so why did his comment hit her so heavily? What? She asked, and Zorian realized he had been staring at her a little too long. Oops. Ako, why are you telling me this when more than half the class isn't even here yet? He asked. Because there is at least a chance you will listen, unlike them, Akocha admitted. Also, someone like you should be an example to other students, not descend to their level. Someone like me? Inquired Zorian. Someone like me? Inquired Zorian. Just get inside, she snapped irritably. He sighed and went inside. It was probably for the best to leave things be. He had other problems to deal with, and she was far too rule-bound for his tastes anyway. He didn't know what he was expecting to happen when he walked into the class. Everyone to stop what they were doing and stare at him, maybe? At least then he would have a reason for feeling so unnerved at attending his first class of the year for the second time. But of course they did no such thing. It wasn't a second time for them, and there was nothing visibly irregular about him for them to take notice. He quashed his unease and sat down in the back of the class, discreetly scanning new arrivals for signs of Zack. He was sure the other boy was connected to this somehow, and the mysterious boy appeared to be Zorian's best chance at understanding what was happening to him. There was a brief commotion when Briam's fire drake familiar hissed up a storm and started chasing Briam's terrified neighbor across the classroom before Briam calmed it down. Apparently the magical reptile liked the unfortunate boy even less than it did Zorian. In any case, Ilsa came in soon after and started the class. Zack never showed up. Zorian spent the entire class in a daze, shocked at this turn of events. Where the hell was Zack? Everything happened almost exactly as it did in his future memories so far, with Zack's absence being the first major deviation. This firmly cemented Zack as somehow connected to this madness, but it also put the boy out of Zorian's reach for the moment. The lecture was even more annoying now than it was the first time he listened to it, since from his perspective he went through these review sessions less than a month ago. Apparently Ilsa worked off some kind of a script, because the lecture was virtually identical to the one from his memory, the only difference being that Zack wasn't there to compete with Akocha for answering Ilsa's questions to the class. Funny how things seem clearer in retrospect. Zack was acting strange right from the start, in that very first lecture, but Zorian thought nothing of it. Sure, Zach volunteering to answer the teacher's questions was out of character for the boy, but not completely implausible. It was just a review session anyway, and they had to know these things to pass the certification. It took 2 weeks before people really began to take notice the extent of Zach's sudden improvement. So many questions, so few answers. He could only hope that Zach would show up soon. Break. Zach didn't come to class that day, or the next, or the day after that. By Friday, Zorian was pretty sure the other boy wouldn't be showing up at all. According to Benesek, Zach simply disappeared from his family mansion on the very same day that Zorian took the train to Syoria, and nobody had seen a hint of him ever since. Zorian didn't think he could cook up anything the investigators hired by the boy's guardian hadn't thought of doing, and he didn't want to attract attention to himself by asking around, so he reluctantly put the mystery of Zach aside for the moment. His schoolwork was going well, at least. Thanks to his foreknowledge, he aced Nora Bull's surprise tests and didn't really have to study for any subject. A small refresher was sufficient to coast him through pretty much anything. Once his warding class really gets going, that's probably going to change, but for now he had all the free time he wanted to deliberate on what he should do about the rapidly approaching summer festival and the accompanying assault. Sadly, with Zach absent, Zorian had hit dead ends in all the clues he had, and was now at loss how to proceed. Come in. Zorian opened the door to Svim's office and defiantly met the man's gaze. He was pretty confident in the accuracy of his future memories by now, Zach's mysterious absence aside, so he knew this was going to be another exercise in frustration. He was tempted to boycott the meetings, but he suspected it was his stoic perseverance in the face of the man's antagonism that eventually convinced Ilsa to take him under her wing. And besides, he felt that he would be doing Svim a favor if he quit. Zorian had a distinct feeling that the man was trying to get him to quit the last time around, and he was far too spiteful to do that. He sat down without prompting, a little disappointed that the man hadn't remarked upon his intentionally rude gesture. Zorian Kaczynski? Svim asked. Zorian nodded and expertly snatched the pen that the man had thrown at him out of the air, having expected it this time. Show me your basic 3, the man ordered, not in the least bit surprised at the feat of coordination. Instantly, without even an extra deep breath, Zorian opened his palm, the pen practically jumping out of his palm and into the air. Make it spin, Svim said. Zorian's eyes widened. What happened to start over? His current attempt wasn't any worse than what he displayed during their last session before that fateful dance, and Svim's only response that night had been start over, just like any other time. What changed now? Are you having problems with hearing? Svim asked. Make it spin. Zorian blinked, finally realizing he should be focusing on the current session instead of his memories. What? What do you mean, make it spin? That's not part of the basic 3. Svim sighed dramatically and slowly took another pen and levitated it over his own palm. Instead of just hanging in the air like Zorian's, however, Svim's pen was spinning like a fan. I have no idea how to do that, Zorian admitted. We weren't taught how to do that in classes. Yes, it is criminal how badly the classes are failing our students, Svim said. Such a simple variation of a levitation exercise should not be beyond the grasp of a certified mage. No matter, we shall correct this deficiency before we move on to other matters. Zorian sighed. Great. No wonder no one ever mastered the basic 3 to Svim's liking if the man keeps redefining what mastered means. There were probably hundreds of small variations of each of the basic 3, enough to spend decades learning them all, so little wonder no one could exhaust them all in 2 measly years. Especially considering Svim's standards for labeling the skill mastered. Go on, Svim urged. Start. Zorian focused intensely on the pen hanging above his palm, trying to figure out how to do that. It should be relatively simple. He just had to affix a stabilization point in the middle of the pen and put pressure on the ends, right? At least, that's the first thing that popped into his head. He had just managed to get the pen to move a bit when he felt a familiar object impact onto his forehead. Zorian glared at Svim, cursing himself for forgetting about the man's damnable marbles. Svim glanced at the pen that was still hovering over Zorian's palm. "You didn't lose focus," Svim remarked. "Good. You threw a marble at me," Zorian accused. "I was hurrying you up," Svim said, unrepentant. "You're too slow. You must be faster. Faster, faster, faster. Start over." Zorian sighed and returned to his task. Yup, definitely an exercise in frustration. Break. Between his unfamiliarity with the exercise and Svim's constant interruptions, Zorian only managed to get the pen to wobble by the end of the session, which was a little humiliating, actually. His above-average shaping skills were one of the few things that set him aside from his fellow mages, and he felt he should have done much better, despite Svim's repeated sabotage attempts. Fortunately, a book describing the exercise in detail was easy to find in the Academy library, so he would hopefully master it by next week. Well, not master it, not in the sense that Svim wanted him to, but he at least wanted to know what he was doing before he tackled his next session with Svim. Of course, normally he wouldn't be willing to pour that much effort into a lousy shaping exercise, but he needed a distraction. At the beginning, the entire time travel situation was so patently ridiculous that he found it easy to remain calm and collected. Some part of him kept expecting that the whole thing was a double dream or something, and that he would wake up one day and not remember a thing. That part was becoming panicked and agitated now that it became obvious that the situation he faced was real. What the hell was he supposed to do? Zack's mysterious absence weighed heavily upon him, inflaming his paranoia and making him reluctant to tell anyone about the invasion. Zorian was not a fundamentally selfless person and didn't want to save people only to screw himself over in the end. Whatever his future memories really were, they were in essence his second chance at life. He was pretty sure he died at the end of his future memories, and he had no intention to squander it. He did consider it his ethical duty to warn people of the danger threatening the city, but there had to be a way to do it without destroying his life or reputation. The simplest idea would be to warn as many people as possible, thus ensuring that at least some of them take the warning seriously, and do so face-to-face, since written communications can be ignored in a way that is not really possible in personal interactions. Unfortunately, that would almost certainly paint him as a madman until he's eventually vindicated by the actual assault. If there is an assault, that is, what if the conspirators decide to lay low upon having their plans unmasked and the invasion doesn't happen? What if nobody takes him seriously until it's too late and then decide to turn him into a scapegoat in order to shift responsibility away from themselves? What if one of the people he tries to warn is part of the conspiracy and has him killed before he can tell anyone else? What if, way too many what ifs? And he had a sneaking suspicion that one of those what ifs was responsible for Zack's disappearance. As a result of these musings, the idea of staying anonymous appealed to him more and more with each passing day. The problem was that sending a message to a bunch of people without having it traced back to you was not at all simple when magic got involved. Divinations weren't all-powerful, but Zorian had only academic understanding of their limitations, and his precautions probably wouldn't hold against a motivated search by a skilled diviner. Zorian sighed and started outlining a tentative plan into his notebook, completely ignoring their history teacher's enthusiastic lecture. He had to figure out who to contact, what to put into the letters, and how to ensure they couldn't be traced back to him. He somehow doubted the government would allow authors to publish instructions on how to evade detection from law enforcement, but he would still check the library to see what they have on the topic. He was so caught up in his self-appointed task he barely noticed when the class ended, furiously scribbling away while everyone else packed and filed out of the classroom. He definitely didn't notice Benesek peering over his shoulder. What are you doing? Zorian slammed his notebook shut in a reflexive maneuver as soon as Benasek started talking and gave the other boy a nasty glare. It's impolite to look over other people's shoulders, Zorian remarked. Jumpy, aren't we? Smiled Benasek, loudly dragging a chair from the nearby table so he could sit on the other side of Zorian's table. Relax, I didn't see anything. Not for the lack of trying, remarked Zorian. Benasek only grinned wider. What do you want, anyway? Just wanted to talk for a bit, Benasek shrugged. You've been really withdrawn this year. You've got this frustrated look on your face all the time, and you're always busy even though it's the start of the school year. Wanted to know what was bothering you, you know? Zorian sighed. This isn't something you can help me with, Ben. Benasek made a strangled noise, apparently outraged by his remark. What do you mean I can't help you? I'll have you know I'm an expert on girl trouble. Now it was Zorian's turn to make a strangled noise. Girl trouble. Oh come on, Benasek laughed. Constantly distracted? Spacing out in the middle of the class? Making plans for sending anonymous letters? It's obvious, man. Who's the lucky girl? There is no lucky girl, Zorian growled. And I thought you didn't see anything? Listen, I don't think sending anonymous letters is a good idea, Benasek said, completely ignoring his remarks. That's so, first year, you know? You should just walk up to her and tell her how you feel. I don't have time for this, Zorian sighed, getting up from his seat. Hey, come on, protested Benasek, trailing after him. Man, you're one touchy guy, did anybody tell you that? I was just. Zorian ignored him. He really didn't need this right now. Break. In retrospect, Zorian should have known that simply ignoring Benasek wasn't such a good idea. It only took 2 days for most of the class to know that Zorian has a crush on someone, and their loud speculation was annoying as hell. Not to mention distracting. Still, his displeasure at the rumors evaporated when Nialu approached him one day and gave him a short list of books he might find useful. He had half a mind to set the list on fire, especially since the list was decorated with dozens of little hearts, but in the end his natural curiosity won over and he went to the library to check them out. He figured that at the very least he'd get a good laugh out of them. He got more than a good laugh, though. Instead of silly love advice like he expected, the books Nialu recommended were all about making sure your letters, gifts, and such couldn't be traced back to you with divinations and other magic. Apparently if you call such advice forbidden love, mysteries of scarlet letters revealed and phrase it as relationship advice, you can get straight past the usual censorship such topics would normally be subjected to. Of course, he had no idea how reliable the advice in those books really was, and the librarian looked at him funny when he checked out books like that, but he was still pleased to have found them. If this whole thing worked out in the end, he'd have to do something nice for Nialu. So as the summer festival approached, Zorian prepared and plotted. He bought a whole stack of generic paper sheets, pens, and envelopes in one of the stores that looked too poor and disorganized to track their customers' purchases. He worded the letters carefully to avoid revealing any personal details. He made sure not to touch the paper with his bare hands at any point, and that none of his sweat, hair, or blood ended up in the envelope. He deliberately wrote in a blocky, formal script that looked nothing like his normal handwriting. He destroyed the pens, the excess paper, and envelopes he didn't use in the end. And then, a week before the festival, he put the letters in different public postal boxes all over Cyoria and waited. It was nerve-wracking, to say the least. Nothing happened, though. No one came to confront him about the letters, which was good, but also nothing out of the ordinary seemed to be happening. Did no one believe him? Did he mess up somehow and the letters ended up not reaching their intended recipients? Are they being so subtle in their reaction that no disturbance is being made? The weight was killing him. Finally, he had enough. On the evening before the dance he decided he'd done everything he could and took the first train out of the city. His letters may or may not have worked, but this way he'll be all right regardless. If anyone asked, though he doubted they would, he'll use his trusty alchemical accident excuse. He messed up a potion and breathed in some hallucinogenic fumes, only coming to his senses when he was already outside of Cyoria. Yes, that's exactly what happened. As the train sped away from Cyoria in the dead of a night, Zorian suppressed his unease and feelings of guilt for doing so little to warn anyone of the approaching attack. What else could he have done? Nothing, that's what. Nothing at all. After a while he fell into uneasy sleep, the rhythmic thumping of the train his lullaby, visions of falling stars and skeletons wreathed in green light haunting his dreams. Break! Zorian's eyes abruptly shot open as sharp pain erupted from his stomach. His whole body convulsed, buckling against the object that fell on him, and suddenly he was wide awake, not a trace of drowsiness in his mind. "Good morning, brother," an annoyingly cheerful voice sounded right on top of him. "Morning, morning, morning." Zorian gaped at his little sister incredulously, his mouth opening and closing periodically. "What, again? Oh, you've got to be kidding me." Zorian growled, and Kiriel quickly got off of him and scooted away fearfully. Apparently she thought his ire was directed at her. "Not you, Kiri, I just had a nightmare, that's all." He couldn't believe it, it happened again. What the hell? He was glad it happened last time, since it meant he wasn't, dead. But now? Now it was just freaky. Why was this happening to him? Oh, and while he was lamenting his fate internally, Kiriel barricaded herself in the bathroom again. God damn it all. Chapter 006. Concentrate and try again. Zorian stared at the endless fields blurring past him, the silence of the otherwise empty compartment only broken by the rhythmic thumping of the train's machinery. He looked calm and relaxed, but it was only a practiced facade and nothing more. His mask of stoicism might have seemed silly, as there was no one around to judge him, but over the years Zorian had found that acting calm on the outside helped him achieve calm more easily on the inside as well. He needed any help he could get in achieving inner peace now, because he was about to start panicking like a headless chicken. Why was this happening again? The first time it had happened, he was dead sure the Lich was responsible. The spell had hit him, and then he woke up in the past. Cause and effect. He hadn't been hit by some mysterious spell this time, though, not unless someone had snuck into the train compartment while he was sleeping, which he found very unlikely. No, he had just dozed off and woke up in the past again, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Then again, it did highlight some things that had been bothering him until now. After all, why had the Lich cast a time travel spell on him? It seemed rather counterproductive to the whole secret invasion plot. Time travel seemed too purposeful and complex to be an accidental side effect, and he seriously doubted the Lich had used a spell whose effects it did not understand. Even a neophyte like him knew what a horrible idea it was to use a spell you don't understand in an uncontrolled environment, and the undead spellcaster wouldn't have reached the level it did if it was willing to do something so foolish for the sake of a couple of brats it had already defeated anyway. No, there was a simpler explanation: the Lich wasn't responsible for his time-traveling problems. It really had been trying to kill them. Them, plural, because Zack had also been the target. The same Zack that had been shockingly good in all his classes all of a sudden. The same Zack that was wandering around the city armed to the teeth with combat magic that should be beyond any academy student. The same Zack that had been making very curious offhand comments all month long. Perhaps it was Zack, not the Lich, who had cast the time travel spell. Zack being a time traveler would explain his vast abilities and inexplicable academic improvement quite nicely. Since this particular method of time travel seems to just send a person's mind into their younger body, he could be of an arbitrarily large age, and what Zorian remembered of Zack's various comments led him to believe the boy had lived through this particular time period many times over. A mage with decades of experience and detailed foreknowledge would no doubt find third-year curriculum laughably easy. Though even if Zack had been the one to cast the time travel spell, there was still left the question of why Zorian was thrown back too. It could have easily been an accident. He knew that grabbing a mage while they're in the process of casting a teleport spell could pull you along for the ride, and they were basically tangled with one another, but that didn't explain why Zorian was repeating this month for the second time. Zack had been absent all month long, and thus hadn't had the opportunity to cast anything at Zorian. He didn't know what to think. Hopefully Zack would be present for questioning this time around. Now stopping in Corsa, a disembodied voice echoed, the faulty speakers crackling with signal noise every once in a while. I repeat, now stopping in Corsa. Thank you. What, already? A glance through the window revealed the familiar white tablet confirming his arrival at the trading hub. He was half tempted to get off the train and spend the entire month fooling around and trying to forget this whole time travel business, but quickly dismissed it. Blowing off the beginning of the school year like that would be really irresponsible and self-destructive, even if going through another identical month of classes was anything but appealing. There was a possibility that he would be flung back into the past for the third time, of course, but that wasn't something he should be relying on. There was no way the spell could keep sending him back indefinitely. After all, it was bound to run out of mana sooner or later. Probably sooner, since time travel must be pretty high level. Right? Zorian snapped out of his thoughts and finally noticed the boy peering into his compartment. He frowned. He specifically chose this compartment because it was completely empty during his second attempt at life. After he had left the green turtleneck girl to her giggling fate, he had come here for some peace, so this time he decided to be proactive and went here right from the start. Apparently it wasn't that simple. He supposed that his very presence attracted the boy. Some people just plain liked company, and would avoid empty compartments. Yes? Zorian said politely, hoping the boy just wanted to ask him something instead of trying to find a seat. He was mistaken. Do you mind if I sit here? No, go right ahead, said Zorian, giving the boy a forced smile. Damn. The boy smiled brightly at him, and quickly dragged his luggage in. A lot of luggage. First year, right? Zorian asked, unable to help himself. So much for his plan on remaining silent and creeping the boy out into leaving the compartment. Oh well.
Yeah,
the boy agreed. How did you know? Your luggage, Zorian remarked. You do realize the academy grounds are pretty far from the main station? Your arms are going to fall off by the time you get there. The boy blinked. Apparently he didn't know. It's really not that bad, right? Zorian shrugged. You better hope it doesn't rain.
Ha! Ha!
The boy laughed nervously. I'm sure I'm not that unlucky. Zorian smirked. Ah, the benefits of foresight. Or was it hindsight? Language really wasn't designed with the possibility of time travel in mind. Ah. I didn't introduce myself. The boy suddenly blurted out. I'm Bjorn Ivarin. Zorian Kaczynski. The boy's eyes lit up immediately. Like Dash. Like Diamond Kaczynski, yes, Zorian said, suddenly finding the window incredibly interesting. The boy stared at him expectantly, but if he had expected further elaboration from Zorian on the subject, he was about to be sorely disappointed. The last thing Zorian wanted to do was talk about his eldest brother. So, Are you related to Diamond Kaczynski or is your last name just a coincidence? Asked the boy after a lengthy pause. Zorian pretended he couldn't hear him, and instead retrieved his notebook from the neighboring seat and studied it intently. It was almost completely empty, since all his previous notes about the invasion and the mystery of his future memories were now gone, lost in a future he left behind him. It wasn't much of a loss, since the vast majority of those notes had been worthless, hollow speculations and dead-end leads that hadn't got him any closer to solving this mystery. Still, he had written down a few things he remembered from his previous notes, like the spell chant the Lich had uttered before killing him. Yes, Zack was likely responsible for all of this, but he couldn't be sure. After judging the silence to have lasted for a fittingly awkward amount of time, Zorian looked up from his notebook to fixate a look of confusion at the waiting boy. Huh? Did you say something? Zorian pretended, frowning slightly as if he honestly hadn't heard a word of the question he was asked. Never mind, the boy backpedaled. It's not important. Zorian gave the boy a genuine smile. At least he could take a hint. He talked to the boy for a while, mostly just answering the boy's questions about first-year curriculum, before growing bored with it and starting to feign interest in his notebook again, hoping he will take the hint. What's so interesting about that notebook, anyway? He asked, either oblivious to Zorian's disinterest in continued conversation or deliberately ignoring it. Don't tell me you're studying already? No, these are just notes on some personal research, said Zorian. It's not going too well, so I'm a little frustrated with it. My mind keeps drifting to it. Especially when the alternative was talking to an overly inquisitive first year. The Academy Library dash. First thing I tried, Zorian sighed. I'm not stupid, you know. The boy rolled his eyes at him. Did you search for the books yourself or did you ask the librarian to help you? Mother works as a librarian, and they have these special divination spells that let them find things in minutes that would take you decades if you search by title and skimming alone. Zorian opened his mouth before closing it. Ask the librarian for help, huh? Okay, maybe he is stupid. Well, it's not really a topic I want to bother the librarian with, Zorian tried. Which was true, but he knew he'd end up trying it anyway. Maybe I could find the spells themselves in the spell repository? But no, if they are anything like other divination spells, it's using them correctly and interpreting the results that's the problem, not casting them. You could always get a job in the library, the boy offered. If the Academy Library is anything like the one my mother works in, they're always desperate for help. They teach their employees how to use those spells as a matter of course. Really? Zorian asked, rather intrigued by the idea. It's worth a try, he said, shrugging. For the rest of the ride, Zorian stopped trying to evade conversation. Bjorn had definitely earned some respect from him. Break. Of course. We're always looking for help. Well, that was easy. We can't pay you much, understand, that miserable gnome of a headmaster cut our budget again. But we're very flexible about work time and we've got a pretty friendly atmosphere here. Zorian waited patiently for the librarian to run out of steam. She was an unassuming middle-aged woman at first glance, but the moment she had begun speaking he realized her looks were rather deceiving. She was cheerful and had a sort of indescribable energy about her. Just standing around her made Zorian feel the same sort of pressure he felt when stuck in a crowd of people, and he had to rein in his instinct to step back as if from a raging fire. I'm guessing you don't get many work offers, then? Zorian tried. Why is that? Shouldn't people be fighting tooth and nail to work in a place like this? It's a pretty famous library. She snorted, and Zorian could swear he could feel the derision and a touch of bitterness in the seemingly innocuous sound. Academy regulations require us to only hire employees that are first circle mages or higher. Most graduates have better paying and more glamorous options than this. She waved her hand towards rows or bookshelves around them, reducing us to hiring students. Who are? She suddenly stopped and blinked, as if remembering something. But anyway, enough of that, she said, clapping her hands and beaming at him. From this day on, you're one of the library assistants. Congratulations! If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. It was only through superhuman willpower that Zorian stopped himself from rolling his eyes at her. He never agreed to anything, merely inquired about the possibility of employment, and she undoubtedly knew that. But oh well, he did want the job, and not just because he was hoping to learn some nifty new spells and translate the Lich's chant. He suspected that library employees got to access parts of the library that would normally be restricted to him as a first circle mage, and that was just too much of a temptation to pass up. Question 1, said Zorian, how often do I come to work? She blinked, surprised for a moment. No doubt she expected him to protest her presumptuousness. Well, when can you come? Between the classes, and the need for study time and other commitments, most of our student employees work once or twice a week. How much time can you set aside for this? The classes are pretty easy at this point, Zorian said. We're mostly doing the review of our second year, which I know like the back of my hand. Setting aside one day for unexpected developments, I could be here 4 times a week. My weekends are mostly free too, if you need any help then. Zorian mentally berated himself for talking like that. The classes hadn't even started yet, so how would he know what they consisted of? Luckily, the librarian didn't call him out on it. Instead, her eyes immediately lit up upon hearing this, and she started shouting. Ivory, she called out. I've got a new partner for you. A bespectacled girl carrying an armload of books popped out of the small room adjacent to the information desk to see what was going on. Oh. It was the green turtleneck girl. She was wearing it even now, that he shared a compartment with. Except he had chosen a seat on the other side of the train this time, so they never met on the train. Oh well, probably wouldn't have mattered anyway. Anyway, I believe some introductions are in order, the librarian said. I am Kirathishli Korisova, one of the few actual librarians in this place. This pretty lady, she gestured towards the turtleneck girl, who blushed at the praise and shifted uncomfortably, clutching the stack of books tighter in her arms, is our resident busy little bee, Ivory Ambercomb. Ivory has been working here since last year, and I don't know what I'd do without her. Ivory, this is Zorian Kaczynski. The girl suddenly perked up at this. Kaczynski? As in, younger brother of Daimen Kaczynski, Zorian said, unable to suppress a small sigh. Actually, I'm pretty sure she meant your other brother, Kirathishli said with a sly smile. She's in class with Fortov and has a bit of a crush. She and a dozen other girls. Fortov never had a shortage of women throwing themselves at him. Miss Korisova. Ivory protested. Oh, lighten up, Kirathishli said. Anyway, Zorian here will be working with us pretty heavily for the foreseeable future. Go show him what to do. And just like that, he was employed at the library. Only time would tell if he was wasting his time. Break. Much like the last time, Zack hadn't come to class. Zorian was half expecting it, but it was no less annoying because of it. It cemented Zorian's suspicion that Zack was heavily involved in this mess, but the boy's absence made it impossible for Zorian to confront him about it. What was he supposed to do now? For that matter, was he supposed to do anything at all? Last time he had been operating on the belief that if he didn't do something about the invasion, no one would. No one else had the strange future memories he did, after all. If his speculations were correct, though, Zack had probably traveled through time specifically to stop the invasion. What other reason did he have to frequent this particular time period? Besides, he had been wandering the city during the attack, picking off attackers. So all in all, there just might be an experienced time-traveling mage on the job already, and he would only get in the way. The problem with that idea was that he was ultimately just guessing, and had no idea if it was true or not. He could be dooming himself and the city through inaction, relying on a boy who, quite frankly, didn't inspire too much confidence in him. Zack reminded him of his brothers a little too much. And besides, didn't Zack lose against the Lich?
Yeah.
Not knowing how to unravel the mystery presented to him, or even where to start, Zorian had thrown himself into schoolwork and his job at the library. Of course, thanks to going through this for the third time, the only issue he had with schoolwork was Svim's grating insistence that his grasp on the pen spinning, as Zorian affectionately called it, exercise was abominable and that he had to do it over and over and over again. His time at the library, on the other hand, was interesting, though not really in the way he hoped it would be. He hadn't learned any spells yet, though he suspected this was because there were so many other, more pressing things he had to learn before Kirithishli and Ibri decided to invest that kind of effort in him. Simply put, he wasn't very good at his job. The seemingly simple job of shuffling some books around was made immensely more complicated by the various library protocols and the all-important book classification scheme. Zorian had hoped to demonstrate basic proficiency with his duties before asking for favors, but it had been 2 weeks and he was beginning to understand that it would take him at least a couple of months to reach that level, and he didn't have that. The summer festival was getting closer. That's why he proceeded to corner Kirithishli after she had dismissed him for the day to ask her about the coveted book divinations. Ibri lingered, pretending to be busy so she could eavesdrop. She sure was nosy for such a shy girl. Say, I've been meaning to ask a small favor of you, Zorian began. Go ahead, Kirithishli said. You've helped us a lot, so I'll be happy to help if I can. It's not often we get such a competent worker. Balked Zorian. Competent? I barely know what I'm doing. If it weren't for your and Ibri's help I would wander around like a headless chicken. That's why I paired you with Ibri, to learn. And boy are you learning fast. Faster than I did when I first started at this job, that's for sure. To be honest, I usually give only the simplest and most tedious jobs to student employees, but since you're more dedicated than them I've given you the advanced course. Ah, Zorian said after a short silence. I'm flattered. And he really was. Anyway, I was wondering about bookfinding divinations. I've been searching for a pretty obscure topic and I'm not going anywhere with it. Ah. Kirithishli said, slapping her forehead. How could I forget about that? Of course I'll teach you, we teach all our long-term workers those. They're a bit tricky to use, though, so it will take a while to learn how to use them properly. Ibri will show you how. Though you can always tell me what exactly you're looking for and I'll do my best to help you out. I know this library like the back of my hand, you know? Zorian debated the merit of showing her the Lich's chant, since he suspected it was something that could get him into a lot of trouble just for asking about it, but saw no other way. No doubt learning how to use those divinations took months he didn't have. He took out his notebook and ripped out the corresponding page, handing it to her. Kirithishli arched her eyebrow at the text, and Ibri gave up on all pretenses of not paying attention and peered over her shoulder to see what was on the slip of paper. It's an unknown language, Zorian clarified. I don't even know which one, really. Tricky, Kirithishli remarked. Finding a written reference based on a phonetic pronunciation of a word you don't even understand is a tall order, even with divinations. You should just find an expert in languages to help you if it's so important. You should try Xenomir, piped in Ibri. Our history teacher, asked Zorian incredulously. He also teaches linguistics, Ibri said. He's a polyglot. Speaks 37 languages. Whoa.
Yeah,
Ivory agreed. He should at least know what language that is, even if he can't read it. He's pretty helpful if you approach him nicely. I doubt he'll turn you away. Interesting. Break. Ah, Mr. Kaczynski, what can I do for you? Xenomir Algai was old. Really old. He wore blue robes, actual robes, like the Magi of old, and had a carefully sculpted white beard. Despite his advanced age, he moved with a spring in his step and his eyes had sharpness that most people half his age lacked. Zorian hadn't taken the linguistics elective, but he knew from his history class that Xenomir cared about his subject almost as much as Nora Bull did about runes and mathematics, though he at least understood that most students didn't share his passion for the subject. I was told you can help me with some translation, Zorian said. I have a pretty fragmentary recording of an unknown language in phonetic form, and I was hoping you could at least tell me what kind of language it is. It's nothing like any language I've encountered so far. Xenomir perked up at the notion of an unknown language and gingerly took the paper slip with the Lich's chant from Zorian's hand. His eyes widened barely a second afterward. Where did you get this? He asked quietly. Zorian debated internally what to do and then settled for a measure of truth. I was attacked by someone a while ago. They used to spell with that chant as the incantation. I just wanted to know what it does. Xenomir took a deep breath and leaned back. You're lucky it didn't hit. It's some kind of soul magic spell. Soul magic? Necromancy, clarified Xenomir. Zorian blinked. Necromancy? Well, it sort of made sense for the Lich to use that sort of spells, but what did necromancy have to do with time travel? Nothing. This was pretty much a definite confirmation of Zack as a primary cause of his predicament. So, wait, what is that language anyway? Asked Zorian. Oh. Yes, the language, it's Old Majera language, spoken by many of the cultures that shared the continent of Mycena with Icosians before their rise to prominence. Many of the ruins in Koth are written in it and, sadly, it is the language in which many of the blackest rituals and necromantic spells are formulated. You won't find any books about it available in public circulations, I'm afraid. But let's return to the matter of this assailant. This is the darkest of magic they used, and they can be up to no good if they're throwing spells like that on Academy students. Deciding he couldn't just backpedal now, Zorian nonetheless decided against mentioning time travel in any way and settled for making something up. He told Xenomir about him overhearing a plan to invade the city during the summer festival. At first he dismissed it as some kind of prank because of its ludicrous nature, but when the two cloaked figures noticed him eavesdropping and started throwing spells he didn't recognize at him, he grew concerned. Xenomir took him a lot more seriously than Zorian thought he would, and told him to go home and leave everything up to him from now on. That went surprisingly well. At least Xenomir hadn't dragged him off to the police station to give a statement right away, though he suspected something like that might be in his near future. He paced nervously around in his room, unable to sleep and steadily losing the fight to keep his growing apprehension in check. Smart or not, the deed was done, and now the only thing he could do was wait and see what the consequences of his decision would be. For him and for everyone. A knock on the door interrupted him. Strong, confident knocking that nonetheless only lasted for a second or two, completely unlike the knocking of anyone he knew. Coming. Zorian called out, suspecting it was someone coming to talk to him about the story he told Xenomir. What can I, Zorian stared dumbly at the blade sticking out of his chest, his mouth opening in an unvoiced scream. He had just enough time to look at his assailant, a short figure dressed in loose black clothes and a faceless white mask, before the blade was painfully wrenched out of his body and then immediately inserted again into his chest cavity. Again and again and again. When darkness consumed his vision, he was actually glad he was dying. Being repeatedly stabbed in the chest hurts. Break. Zorian's eyes abruptly shot open as sharp pain erupted from his stomach. His whole body convulsed, buckling against the object that fell on him, and suddenly he was wide awake, not a trace of drowsiness in his mind. Good dash. Kiriel was cut off as Zorian shot upright, eyes wide in fright, gasping for breath. He was killed. They killed him. He told someone about the attack and he was killed that very evening. How the hell had they even found out that fast? Was Xenomir in on the attack or were they just that well informed? Nightmare? Kiriel asked. Zorian breathed deeply, ignoring the phantom pain in his chest as he did so.
Yeah.
Definitely a nightmare. Break. Zorian knew he should focus on what Ilsa was saying, but for the life of him his mind wouldn't stop dwelling on what had happened. In retrospect, he shouldn't be so surprised at that particular turn of events. An invasion of that scale cannot be kept secret without some hefty inside help, so of course they'd find out about anyone raising an alarm about them. And besides, if stopping the invasion had as simple a solution as notifying the law enforcement, surely Zack would have already done it and Zorian wouldn't be repeating this month for the third time. Although, he was starting to develop a healthy dose of respect for these restarts. This was the second time he died and he only went through this month thrice. He seemed prone to dying. Didn't Zack say something about him always getting blown up in that initial barrage unless he did something about it? He snapped back into the real world when he realized Ilsa had stopped talking and was looking at him intently. He gave her a questioning look. "Are you quite all right?" she asked, and Zorian noticed her glancing at his hands. Why would she? Oh. His hands were shaking. He was probably quite pale too, if the skin on his hands was of any indication. He rubbed his hands together a few times and then balled them up into fists to reassert control over them. Not quite, Zorian admitted. But I will be. You don't have to worry about it. She stared at him for a second longer and then nodded. Very well, she said. Do you want me to teleport you to the academy? I can't imagine riding the train in the state you're in is going to be very pleasant for you. Zorian blinked, at loss what to say. He disdained train travel at the best of times, so an offer like this was a godsend at the moment, but why? I don't want to inconvenience you, he tried. Don't worry, I was going there anyway, she said. It's the least I could do for getting to you so late and taking the choice of your mentor away from you. Well, that much was true. Svim really was a horrible, useless mentor. Zorian excused himself to tell Mother he was leaving, which took way too long in his opinion, since Mother wouldn't stop bombarding him with questions about teleportation, suddenly concerned about his safety, before picking up his luggage and following Ilsa outside. He was actually a little excited, since he'd never teleported before. He'd have been even more excited, but the memory of being stabbed to death was still uncomfortably fresh, dampening his enthusiasm somewhat. Ready? She asked. He nodded. Don't worry, the rumors about the dangers of teleporting are mostly exaggerated, Ilsa said. You can't get stuck inside solid objects, the spell doesn't work that way. And if something goes wrong I'll immediately know it and collapse the spell before dimensional ripples tear us apart. Zorian scowled. He already knew that, but saw no point in pointing that out. She obviously heard his little exchange with Mother. Ilsa started chanting and Zorian stood straighter, not wanting to miss. The world rippled, then changed. Suddenly they were both standing in a well-lit circular room, a large magical circle carved into the marble floor they stood on. There was no disorientation, no flash of colors, no nothing, almost disappointing. He studied the room they were in a little more closely, trying to understand where they were. This is the teleport redirection point, Ilsa said. The Academy wards shunt every incoming teleport into this place for security reasons. Of course, that's assuming you're properly keyed in and have sufficient authorization to teleport in at all. She fixed him with a penetrating gaze. Teleporting into a warded space is just one of the many dangers of the spell. Don't experiment with it on your own. I'm pretty sure teleport is far above my access level, pointed out Zorian. She shrugged. Some students are capable of reconstructing a spell after seeing it performed only once. Once you know the chant and gestures, 80% of the work has already been done for you. Zorian blinked. Now why didn't he think of that? Would you mind casting that spell one more time? He asked innocently. Strictly for academic purposes, you see. She chuckled. No. If it makes you feel any better, I doubt you have enough mana reserves to cast the spell even once. As a point of fact, it didn't make him feel any better. He didn't care how dangerous it was, he'd learn the teleport spell as soon as he was able. He just shaved off an entire day of train travel from his journey in an instant. The ability to do that kind of thing would be worth quite a lot of trouble to acquire. He let out a sigh and left Ilsa to her own devices to get settled in. I could get used to this kind of travel, Zorian mumbled to himself as he unlocked the door to his room and dropped his luggage to the floor in relief. Too bad I could never fake distress convincingly enough, or else I'd convince Ilsa to take me along at the beginning of every restart. He froze mid-step. He shouldn't be thinking like that. That was dangerous thinking. He had no proof that the restarts would keep happening indefinitely. In fact, everything he knew about magic told him it couldn't be true. Whatever spell had been put on him was going to run out of mana at some point, and then there'd be no restart, no second chances, no return from the dead. He had to treat every restart as if it were his last, because it might very well be. Though he had to admit that, despite it ending with him getting stabbed to death, the previous restart wasn't a complete disaster. At least he had all but confirmed it was Zack, and not the Lich, that was responsible for this. Instead of researching unknown languages and time travel, it would probably be wiser to find out where Zack keeps disappearing to every time. But not right now. He deserved a little rest after being brought back from the dead. Break. He really should have known it wouldn't be that easy. The moment he tried to track down Zack, he was reminded of why he didn't do that in his very first restart. Zack was not only an heir of noble House Novita, he was the only still living member of that house, the rest of his family having been killed in the Splinter Wars. Zack stood to inherit a sizable financial empire and a legacy of several generations of mages once he came of age, so everything about him was scrutinized closely by a great number of interested parties. Consequently, his disappearance was a big deal, and a lot of people wanted to know where he went. Zorian was just one of these people, and if those people, and the people they hired, hadn't managed to track him down, he had very little chance to do so. Needless to say, he didn't get anywhere. Like he suspected, the two girls Zack hung out with during Zorian's original month were nothing special without the Novita heir there to help them out and hang out with them, and asking people about them led to some pretty annoying rumors being spread around. Honestly, can't a guy ask about a girl without everyone assuming he's got a romantic interest in her? His house was sealed with some pretty heavy ward work, his legal guardian could not be reached, and if he had any close friends they weren't among his classmates. Zorian wasn't a detective, and had no idea what else to look for. And considering that many professional detectives had already failed, and continued to fail, to track the boy down, he suspected it wouldn't help even if he did know a thing or two about tracking people down. A month went by with little to show for it. Summer festival came, and Zorian once again boarded a train out of Cyoria, awake and alert as the night deepened and minutes ticked away. He brought a pocket watch with him this time, and kept glancing at it every once in a while, silently praying that he wouldn't have to start over once again but wanting to know exactly when he got thrown back in case he did. Sure enough, his prayers wouldn't be answered. Somewhere around 2 past midnight he blacked out and woke up with Kiri on top of him, wishing him a good morning. He probably should have admitted it to himself right then and there. He was a fairly smart person, after all, and not prone to deluding himself. Instead, it took 4 more restarts before he accepted the truth of his predicament. He was stuck in some kind of a time loop, and it wasn't going to end anytime soon. He didn't know how it was possible. Maybe the spell was powered by Zach's seemingly inexhaustible mana reserves instead of being limited to a fixed amount at the moment of casting. Maybe it was one of those rare self-sustaining spells. Hell, maybe it reached into the heart of the world and drew power from the world dragon itself. It didn't really matter how it did it, only that it did. But that's retrospect. At the time he just refused to accept it, and instead tried to live like he normally would. It was rather boring, yes, but what if this particular restart was the one where it ended? The restart where the consequences of his choices would not magically disappear at 2 past midnight on the night of the festival. He checked, and yes, it was consistent across all 4 restarts. He was through with that though. He couldn't go on like this. Excluding the invasion bit, the month had been a bore even the first time around, and he had lived through it 8 times already. He knew the first month curriculum well enough by now to get near perfect scores in all subjects, even warding. It had little effect on how people treated him, as he found out. He was known to be capable, and his grades had always been very good, so people weren't really surprised if he aced all the exams or effortlessly performed a perfect magic missile on their very first combat magic class. It was within the realm of people's expectations, unlike Zach's sudden improvement. The only people whose behavior changed in response to his improvement were Akoja and Svim. Akoja had gotten twice as annoying now that she apparently found a kindred soul, always insisting that they check each other's work and asking him for help whenever she didn't understand something. Zorian had thought she'd be green with jealousy that he was beating her scores, but it seemed she was a lot less bothered to be outdone by him, as opposed to by the likes of Zach and Nialu. Svim took his superb scores as an indication that he should be held to an even higher standard. As such, not only did he not declare his pen spinning good enough to move on to something else, he had demoted him back to the regular levitation exercise. In all honesty, Zorian wasn't terribly bothered by that. Even if he did master the pen spinning exercise to Svim's satisfaction, no doubt he'd get nothing more than another minor variation of the basic 3 to practice. So all in all, going through another boring month like that was out of the question. He took different electives this time: astronomy, architecture, and geography of the global mana flow, and he fully intended to bring down his academic scores back to normal so Svim and Akoja would remain their normal, more tolerable selves. He also intended to skip quite a few time-consuming homework projects to focus on his own personal studies, and he was going to spend a sizable portion of his savings on alchemical supplies. Should this restart be the final one, he was going to be seriously inconvenienced, but it wouldn't be the end of the world, and he suspected the disruptions following in the wake of the invasion would render many of the normal concerns moot. Then he walked into the Essential Invocations classroom on the first day of school and realized his plans would have to be adjusted. Zach was finally back in class.